War. War has a way of revealing the darkest corners of human nature. Behind the curtain of battles and soldiers, there are secrets so sinister, they were meant to stay hidden forever. One of those secrets comes from the chilling story of Unit 731. Today, we're uncovering the unspeakable horrors of Japan's covert biological and chemical warfare program during World War II, an operation that conducted some of the most grotesque and inhumane experiments on prisoners in human history. Welcome to Unmasked, where we unearth the stories no one wants you to know. Brace yourselves. This one will leave you disturbed. The year was 1937. Japan had invaded China, marking the start of a bloody and ruthless conflict that would soon escalate into World War II. In the shadow of this brutality, something even darker was taking shape. Hidden deep in the remote plains of Manchuria, a covert operation was underway. The creation of Unit 731. Officially, it was known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. But behind the name lay something far more sinister. Unit 731 wasn't about prevention. It was about death, destruction, and unimaginable suffering. At the helm of this twisted unit was a man named Shiro Ishii, a brilliant yet deranged military physician who had a vision to weaponize disease, to use biological warfare as the ultimate tool of domination. Ishii convinced the Japanese military of the potential power in turning bacteria into weapons, and with their approval, he was given free rein to build his secret laboratory, a 150-building compound that became a house of horrors for the thousands who entered it and never came out. The prisoners of Unit 731 were not soldiers. They were civilians, Chinese men, women, and children, along with Russian prisoners of war, and even Allied forces, all captured and forced into unimaginable suffering. They were referred to not as people, but as logs, or maruda, a term dehumanizing them and reducing them to mere objects for experimentation. What happened to these individuals? Words can barely do it justice, but let me try. Imagine being injected with a deadly virus, knowing that no treatment was coming. Or worse, imagine being cut open while fully conscious without anesthesia, your organs removed one by one in an effort to study the effects of disease on the human body. Unit 731's experiments included vivisections, surgeries performed on living humans, testing the limits of the human body's endurance under extreme torture. Prisoners were exposed to frostbite conditions to study gangrene. Limbs were amputated and reattached to the other side of the body, and diseases like the bubonic plague and anthrax were deliberately spread among the prisoners. The horror didn't end inside the lab. Unit 731 sought to test its biological weapons on the battlefield. Infected fleas carrying the bubonic plague were dropped over Chinese cities, leading to outbreaks that claimed thousands of lives. Anthrax bombs, cholera, and typhoid were also part of their arsenal. Venereal disease has been the bane of organized militaries since ancient Egypt, and so it stands to reason that the Japanese military would take an interest in the symptoms and treatment of syphilis. To learn what they needed to know, doctors assigned to Unit 731 infected victims with the disease and withheld treatment to observe the uninterrupted course of the illness. A contemporary treatment, a primitive chemotherapy agent called salvarsan, was sometimes administered over a period of months to observe the side effects, however. To ensure effective transmission of the disease, syphilitic male victims were ordered to rape both female and male fellow captives, who would then be monitored to observe the onset of the disease. If the first exposure failed to establish infection, more rapes would be arranged until it did. Beyond just the syphilis experiments, rape became a common feature of Unit 731's experiments. For example, Female captives of childbearing age were sometimes forcibly impregnated so that weapon and trauma experiments could be done on them. After being infected with various diseases, exposed to chemical weapons, or suffering crush injuries, bullet wounds, and shrapnel injuries, the pregnant subjects were opened up and the effects on the fetuses studied. The idea seems to have been to translate the team's findings into civilian medicine. But if Unit 731's researchers ever published these results, the papers seem not to have survived the war years. The totality of Unit 731's research was in support of their larger mission, which by 1939 was to develop horrific weapons of mass destruction for use against the Chinese population, and presumably American and Soviet forces, if the time ever came. To this end, Unit 731 cycled through tens of thousands of captives at several facilities across Manchuria, which had been occupied by imperial forces for years. Inmates of these facilities were infected with several of the most lethal pathogens known to science, such as Yersinia pestis, which causes bubonic and pneumonic plague, and typhus, which the Japanese hoped would spread from person to person after being deployed and depopulate disputed areas. To breed the most lethal strains possible, doctors monitored patients for rapid onset of symptoms and quick progression. Victims who pulled through were shot, but those who got sickest fastest were bled to death on a mortuary table, and their blood was used to transfect other captives, the sickest of whom would themselves be bled to transfer the most virulent strain to yet another generation. One member of Unit 731 later recalled that very sick and unresisting captives would be laid out on the slab so a line could be inserted into their carotid artery. When most of the blood had been siphoned off and the heart was too weak to pump anymore, an officer in leather boots climbed onto the table and jumped on the victim's chest with enough force to crush the ribcage, whereupon another dollop of blood would spurt into the container. From contemporary accounts, it is known that more than 2,000 civilians died of plague following this attack, and that another 1,000 or so died in nearby Yu after the plague was carried there by sick railway workers. Other attacks, using anthrax, killed approximately 6,000 more people in the area. A few years later, as the war was nearing its end, Japan likewise planned to bomb America with plague-ridden fleas, but never got the chance. In August 1945, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki had both been bombed, the Soviet army had invaded Manchuria and utterly annihilated the Japanese army, and the Emperor read his infamous surrender declaration over the radio. Unit 731 was officially disbanded. And then, as quickly as it began, Unit 731 disappeared. As Japan faced defeat in 1945, Shiro Ishii ordered the destruction of all evidence of the atrocities committed. Buildings were burned, documents were destroyed, and the remaining prisoners were executed to silence any witnesses. But that's not the end of the story. When the Allied forces took control of Japan, they uncovered the remnants of Unit 731. But instead of bringing Shiro Ishii to justice, something even more shocking happened. The United States struck a deal with the doctors of Unit 731. In exchange for the results of their experiments, Ishii and his colleagues were granted immunity, allowing them to walk free. To this day, Japan has not apologized for, and China has not forgiven, the countless atrocities Japanese forces visited upon China between 1931 and 1945 during the Second Sino-Japanese War and beyond. As the last witnesses to this history grow old and die, it's possible that the matter will never be addressed again. Unit 731's experiments have left a haunting legacy on modern science. Though their methods were brutal and inhumane, their research contributed to advancements in biological warfare and disease prevention, at a price that can never be justified. The ethical questions raised by Unit 731's legacy are still debated to this day. Can knowledge gained through such horrific means ever be used for good? And how do we ensure such atrocities never happen again? Unit 731 remains one of the darkest chapters in human history, a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink in the pursuit of power. The horrors of Unit 731 are not just stories from the past. They are warnings for the future. As we uncover these chilling truths, we must ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go in the name of progress? And what horrors still lurk in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered? Thank you for watching this episode of Unmask. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because there are more dark secrets waiting to be revealed.